He was given nothing but a key to a rusty metal shed on a forgotten piece of land. What he built there would save his life. If you've ever felt a door close behind you for the last time, the kind of heavy, institutional door that clicks with an echo of finality, you know what I'm talking about. Stick with me, and maybe hit that subscribe button, because this story is for all of us who had to find our own way home. The door to the Northview Group Home for Boys closed at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning on my 18th birthday. It didn't slam. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, oiled, bureaucratic click that severed the final thread connecting me to the system that had owned my life since I was 6. I stood on the cracked concrete steps with a single, worn duffel bag slung over my shoulder. Inside was everything I owned. 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read 100 times, a toothbrush, and a thin file of papers that officially declared me an adult, free and utterly, terrifyingly alone. The October air was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and exhaust fumes from the city bus that hissed at the curb a block away. For 12 years, my world had been beige walls, scheduled meals, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. Now, it was this: a gray sky, a crumbling sidewalk, and the vast, crushing weight of a future I had no map for. My only instruction was a slip of paper with an address on it. A downtown office building, polished and anonymous. A final meeting with a man named Mr. Henderson, a county-appointed trustee I'd never met. He was the keeper of whatever was left of my family's estate, which I'd always been told was nothing. A formality, they said. A final signature to release the state from any further responsibility. I walked the 2 miles to the office because I didn't have the change for the bus. Each step felt unreal, the city noise a chaotic symphony after the muted quiet of Northview. The people on the street moved with purpose, their faces set toward jobs, appointments, lives. I was just moving, a ghost in a worn hoodie, invisible and untethered. Mr. Henderson's office was on the 14th floor. The elevator ride was silent. My reflection in the polished brass, a stranger's face, too thin, eyes too old. The office itself was predictably sterile. Gray carpet, abstract art that looked like a paint spill, a receptionist who didn't look up when I said my name. Mr. Henderson himself was a man made of soft edges and tired tweed. He had a kind, weary face, the sort that had seen thousands of stories like mine, and knew how most of them ended. He didn't offer platitudes or false cheer. He just gestured to a chair and slid a cardboard box across his wide mahogany desk. It was a simple, unassuming box, held together with yellowing tape. "Leo," he said, his voice quiet. "Happy birthday. This is it. This is what was left in trust for you by your grandfather, Elias Vance." I stared at the box. My grandfather, a name from a file, a man who had died before I was even placed in the system. I had no memory of him, no photograph, nothing. He was a ghost, more abstract than the art on the wall. "I was told there was nothing," I said. The words came out rusty, unused to speaking in a place so quiet. "Financially, that's more or less true," Mr. Henderson said, folding his hands. "After your parents passed, well, your grandfather spent most of what he had on their affairs, and then on arrangements for you, before his own health failed. There is no money. I need you to be clear on that. The state stipend ends today. What's in this box is your entire inheritance." He paused, his gaze steady and serious. "And your only option, as far as I can see." My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the box closer. It felt impossibly light and impossibly heavy at the same time. I broke the old tape with my thumbnail and lifted the flaps. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like yellowed newspaper clippings, was a single, heavy iron key, a thick manila envelope, and a smaller, sealed envelope with my name, Leo, written on it in faint, spidery handwriting. That was it. No sentimental trinkets, no hidden cash, just a key and 2 envelopes. A wave of bitter disappointment washed over me, so sharp it felt like a physical blow. This was my grand inheritance? The key to a life of freedom? "What is this?" I asked, my voice flat. Mr. Henderson leaned forward. "The large envelope contains the deed to a piece of property. 5 acres, located in the Cascade foothills, about 3 hours east of here. It was your grandfather's. The taxes are delinquent. 2 years past due, to be exact. You have 90 days to pay them, or the county will seize the land and sell it at auction." He slid another paper across the desk. It was a tax bill. The number on it made my stomach clench. It might as well have been $1 million. "And the key?" "It's for the only structure on the property," he said. "According to the records, it's a Quonset hut. A shed. I had inherited a shed on a piece of land I was about to lose." The humor was so bleak, so cruel, that I almost laughed. "The system raises you, chews you up, and on your 18th birthday spits you out with the key to a rusty tin can in the middle of nowhere." It was perfect. It was the punchline to a joke I'd been living my whole life. "There's one more thing," Mr. Henderson said, his tone shifting slightly. He gestured toward the smaller envelope, the one with my name on it. "That is a personal letter from your grandfather. He left explicit instructions that I was to give it to you on your 18th birthday, and only after explaining the tax situation. He wanted you to understand the reality of your circumstances before you read it." He stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. "Leo, I have to be honest with you. There's a development firm, Viridian Group, that has been trying to acquire the land in that area for a new resort project. They've made a standing offer for your grandfather's parcel. It's a significant amount of money, enough to get you an apartment, a car, a real start. I've taken the liberty of including their contact information with the tax bill." He looked at me, his professional calm cracking for just a moment to reveal a flicker of genuine concern. "It's the smart play, son. Sell it. Take the money and don't look back. There's nothing for you out there." I scooped the contents of the box into my duffel bag, the iron key cold and heavy in my hand. Nothing for me out there. He was probably right. There had never been anything for me, anywhere. I walked out of the office without another word, the weight of the key pulling my bag down, a heavy, useless anchor. I didn't read the letter. Not yet. The thought of a dead man's words felt too intimate, too much for the hollow space inside my chest. I spent that first night of freedom on a bench in a bus station, the city lights blurring through the dirty glass, my hand wrapped around the key in my pocket, the cold metal a single solid point in a world that was dissolving around me. The letter from my grandfather sat in my bag, a silent, unopened judgment. What could he possibly have to say that would change anything? He was dead. I was here. The story was already over. The bus ride east was a journey into a different country. The concrete and steel of the city bled into sprawling suburbs, then faded into farmland, and finally gave way to the deep, dense green of the foothills. The sky, which had been a flat, uniform gray over the city, now had texture and depth, with heavy, bruised-looking clouds clinging to the tops of the mountains. I watched the world change through the smudged window, feeling smaller with every mile that passed. The other passengers were mostly locals, their faces weathered, their conversations muted. I was an outsider, a city kid with a thin jacket and a haunted look, and I felt their occasional, curious glances like a physical touch. I got off at a stop that was nothing more than a gravel pullout on the side of a two-lane highway. The bus pulled away, its diesel fumes a last, lingering breath of the world I knew. And then there was silence. A profound, ringing silence, broken only by the whisper of wind in the towering fir trees that lined the road. The air was clean and cold, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was a smell from a life I'd never lived. The address on the deed was for a rural route number. I had asked the bus driver, a stoic man with a thick beard, where it might be. He'd grunted and pointed down a narrow, unpaved road that disappeared into the forest. "About 4 miles that way," he'd said. "Hope you got good boots." I didn't. I had worn-out sneakers with thin soles, and the gravel on the road was sharp and unforgiving. The walk was long. The silence of the forest was unnerving at first. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sounded like a threat. But as I walked, a strange calm began to settle over me. The sheer scale of the trees, the endless green, the cool, clean air. It was overwhelming, but not in the way the city was. It wasn't demanding or hostile, it just was. After what felt like an eternity, the road opened into a small clearing. And there it was. The Quonset hut sat in the middle of the 5 acres, a great, arched metal rib cage half swallowed by overgrown grass and creeping blackberry vines. It was bigger than I had imagined, maybe 40 feet long. Its corrugated steel skin rusted to a deep mottled orange that glowed in the weak afternoon light. It looked less like a building and more like a beached whale, ancient and forgotten. The land around it was a chaotic meadow of weeds and wildflowers, sloping gently down to a thick line of trees that probably marked the edge of the property. There was no house, no barn, no other sign of human life. Just this metal shell and the untamed land. Mr. Henderson was right. There was nothing for me here. The key felt heavy in my hand as I approached the door, a simple, flat panel of steel set into the front of the hut. The lock was old and stiff, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get the key to turn. It gave way with a loud, grating crack that echoed inside the structure. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, opening into a cavernous, dusty darkness. The air that rolled out was cold and stale, thick with the smell of rust, motor oil, and mice. I hesitated on the threshold, a primal fear of the dark, of enclosed spaces, making my skin crawl. But the wind was picking up, carrying the promise of rain, and this was the only shelter I had. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Light filtered in through a few grimy plexiglass windows set high up on the curved walls, illuminating a vast, open space. The floor was concrete, cracked and stained. The air was filled with dancing dust motes. Against one wall was a long, sturdy workbench littered with old tools, coffee cans full of nuts and bolts, and cobweb-shrouded jars. A cast-iron wood stove stood in one corner, a rusty pipe snaking up to the ceiling. In the center of the room, draped in a dusty canvas tarp, was the hulking shape of an old pickup truck, its tires flat. And in the far back corner, almost hidden in the deepest shadows, was a simple wooden cot with a thin, stained mattress. Next to it, a small metal footlocker. This was my grandfather's world. This was my inheritance, a tomb of forgotten projects and lingering loneliness. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor, the sound swallowed by the immense, echoing space. The finality of it all hit me then, a wave of despair so powerful it buckled my knees. I sank down onto the dusty concrete, the cold seeping through my jeans, and for the first time since the door of Northview had clicked shut, I let myself cry. I cried for the childhood I'd never had, for the parents I couldn't remember, for the grandfather who had left me this empty metal shell. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were dry, until there was nothing left inside me but a vast, hollow ache. As dusk settled, painting the dusty windows in shades of purple and gray, I knew I couldn't stay on the floor forever. The cold was becoming a serious, biting thing. My first priority was survival. I found a stack of old, dry firewood next to the stove, and after a dozen attempts with a book of damp matches I found on the workbench, I managed to get a small, sputtering fire going. The warmth was tentative at first, a fragile bloom in the cavernous cold, but it was life. It pushed back the deepest of the shadows and made the space feel slightly less like a crypt. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I had nothing to eat. I had spent my last few dollars on the bus ticket. I found a spigot outside, attached to a well pump, and after several minutes of frantic, muscle-straining work on the handle, a stream of icy, rust-colored water gushed out. It eventually ran clear, and I drank until my teeth ached, the water tasting of stone and minerals. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. That night, I huddled by the stove, wrapped in the dusty canvas tarp from the truck. The fire cast long, dancing shadows on the curved metal walls. The wind howled outside, a lonely, mournful sound, and rain began to beat a rhythmic tattoo on the steel roof. It was the loudest, most encompassing sound I had ever heard. It wasn't the muffled drone of the city. It was the sound of the world, raw and immediate. In the flickering firelight, my eyes fell on the small envelope I had placed on the workbench, the one with my name on it. I had run as far as I could. There was nowhere left to go. It was time to hear what the dead man had to say. My fingers were stiff with cold as I picked it up. The paper was thick, creamy, and felt impossibly old. The handwriting was shaky but precise, each letter formed with a deliberate, careful pressure. I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter began without preamble. Leo, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are 18. I am sorry. I am sorry for all of it. I am sorry I could not be there to see you become a man. I am sorry for the life you have had. None of it was what I wanted for you. The words were a punch to the gut. I had expected legal jargon, instructions, maybe a cold, distant apology. But this was grief. This was regret. I moved closer to the fire, the orange light illuminating the page as I continued to read. There are things you do not know about your parents, and things you do not know about me. Your father, my son, was a good man, but he got mixed up with some very bad people. He owed them a lot of money. When he and your mother died, that debt did not die with them. It fell to me, and they made it clear it would one day fall to you. They didn't want money. They wanted this land. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about taxes. This wasn't about a simple inheritance. I looked around at the dark, cavernous space, which suddenly felt less empty and more like a trap. This land has been in our family for 100 years, the letter continued. There is a spring on the north end of the property that is one of the purest water sources in the state. And beneath this ground, there is a significant deposit of rare earth minerals. Not enough to make us rich, but enough for a company like Viridian Development to want it very, very badly. The people your father owed money to are connected to them. They have been trying to force us out for years, using legal loopholes, intimidation, anything they could think of. They are not good people, Leo. They are vultures in expensive suits. When I got sick, I knew I couldn't protect you from them anymore. The system, for all its faults, was the only place I could hide you. I gave up my role as your guardian and let the state take you, making it look like I had abandoned you. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It broke my heart every single day. But it was the only way to keep you off their radar until you were a legal adult with the full right to this land in your name. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. Abandonment, the word that had defined my entire existence, the central, painful truth of my life, was a lie. It wasn't a rejection. It was a protection, a sacrifice. The hollow ache in my chest filled with a confusing, turbulent storm of emotions, grief, rage, and a strange, painful flicker of love for a man I had never known. He hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me. I forced myself to read on. They will come for you now. They will offer you money, a lot of it, enough to make you forget this place, to make you run and never look back. Mr. Henderson will tell you to take it. He is a good man, but he does not know the whole truth. He will see it as your only rational choice. And maybe it is. But I am giving you another choice. It is a harder choice, Leo. It will require work and faith and a different kind of courage. This was the part of the letter where the handwriting became even more deliberate, the instructions laid out with the precision of an engineer. This Quonset hut is more than a shed. It is a shelter, but it is vulnerable. I designed it for a specific purpose, a purpose I never had the time or strength to finish. It is meant to be an earth-sheltered home. You must cover it. Use the earth from the high ground behind the hut. Cover the sides, cover the roof, until it is buried in a thick cocoon of soil. Leave only the front face and the windows exposed. Plant the sod deep. In a year, it will look like nothing more than a natural hill, a rise in the land. It will be nearly invisible. It will be insulated from the heat and the cold. With the wood stove and the well, you can live here, off the grid, for almost nothing. You will be safe. You will be hidden. They cannot take what they cannot find. The letter went on, detailing the process, explaining how to brace the interior walls to handle the immense weight of the earth, where to dig, what kind of grass to plant. It was a blueprint, a survival manual written by a ghost. At the bottom of the page, there was a final paragraph. Inside the footlocker next to the cot, you will find my tools, some seeds, and some money. Not much, but enough to pay the back taxes and buy supplies for the first few months. The choice is yours, son. Sell the land and take their money. I will not blame you if you do. You are owed an easy life. Or stay. Build the home I couldn't. Live on the land that is your birthright. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done, but it will be yours, and you will be free. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you. I have always loved you. Your grandfather, Elias. I folded the letter, my vision blurred. The money, the tools. He had left me a choice, but he had also left me the means to make it. I stumbled over to the footlocker in the corner. It was unlocked. I lifted the heavy metal lid. Inside, neatly organized, were hand tools, a hammer, saws, a level, wrenches. There were canvas bags filled with seeds, potatoes, beans, squash. And underneath it all, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick stack of cash. I counted it with trembling fingers. It was just over the amount needed for the tax bill, with a few $100s to spare. He had planned it all. For years, he must have been planning, saving, preparing this final, desperate gift for me. This wasn't an inheritance of property. It was an inheritance of a chance. A single, difficult, beautiful chance. The night was long. I didn't sleep. I sat by the dying embers of the fire, the letter in my lap, the cash and the key on the floor beside me. The two paths stretched out before me, clear and stark. I could take the money. I could walk away from this cold, rusty shed, away from the ghosts and the threats, and disappear into a life of anonymous comfort. Buy an apartment, get a job, be a normal person. No one would blame me. My grandfather himself had said so. Or I could stay. I could honor the sacrifice of this man I never knew. I could take up his fight. I could dig into this land and build something real, something that was mine, something that no one could ever take away from me. It was an insane choice. It was back-breaking labor, isolation, a fight against a powerful, faceless enemy. It was everything I was not equipped to handle. I was a product of the system, raised on routine and dependency. I didn't know how to build anything. I barely knew how to take care of myself. But as the first pale light of dawn crept through the grimy windows, something shifted inside me. For my entire life, my story had been written by other people. Caseworkers, administrators, lawyers. I was a file in a cabinet, a problem to be managed. Selling the land would be just another chapter in that story, the scared orphan who took the easy money and ran. It was the sensible ending. It was the expected ending. But what if I didn't want the expected ending? What if, for the first time in my life, I wanted to pick up the pen and write my own story? The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But now it was mixed with something else, a flicker of defiance, a spark of hope. I looked at my hands, soft and pale from a life lived indoors. They didn't look like hands that could build a home, but they were all I had. I thought of my grandfather, alone in his final days, writing that letter, packing that footlocker, holding on to this one last, desperate hope for me. How could I let that hope die? How could I walk away from the only true gift anyone had ever given me? When the sun was fully up, casting long, golden rays through the open door of the hut, my decision was made. I wasn't going to run. I was going to dig. The first step was the taxes. I took the old truck. It was a relic, a late 70s Ford with more rust than paint, but my grandfather had left the keys in the ignition and a can of gasoline on the workbench. It took me half the morning to get the flat tires inflated with a manual pump I found, but the engine, to my astonishment, turned over with a guttural roar. Driving it was a terrifying, exhilarating experience. The steering was loose, the brakes were soft, and every bump in the dirt road felt like an earthquake. I drove the hour to the county seat, a small, sleepy town with a historic courthouse in the center square. I walked into the tax assessor's office, my heart pounding, the wad of cash feeling illicit and dangerous in my pocket. The woman behind the counter gave me a skeptical look, but she took the money, stamped my papers with a loud, satisfying thud, and handed me a receipt. Just like that, the land was mine, free and clear, for now. With the remaining money, I bought supplies, not luxuries, but essentials. A sturdy shovel, a wheelbarrow, work gloves, a new axe head, and as much non-perishable food as I could carry. Sacks of rice, beans, flour, canned goods, coffee. The drive back felt different. Before, I was a visitor, a trespasser. Now, I was driving home. The work began the next day, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done. My grandfather's letter had been clear. Use the earth from the high ground behind the hut. It was a small natural berm, maybe 20 feet high, composed of dense, rocky soil. My task was to move a small mountain, one shovelful at a time. The first day, I lasted 2 hours before my muscles screamed in protest, and my hands were raw with blisters, even through the new gloves. My back ached in places I didn't know I had. I would dig until I couldn't lift the shovel, load the wheelbarrow until my arms shook, and haul the heavy load to the side of the Quonset, dumping it against the corrugated steel. It felt futile. The pile of earth was pathetic, a tiny mound against the vastness of the metal wall. The hut seemed to mock me, its curved surface impossibly large. That night, I collapsed onto the cot, every inch of my body throbbing with pain, and slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of exhaustion that goes beyond bone deep. But I got up the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. A routine began to form, dictated by the sun and the limits of my own body. Wake at dawn, start the fire, make coffee, eat a bowl of oatmeal, and then dig. I dug through the cold autumn mornings, the sun warming my back. I dug through the afternoon, sweat stinging my eyes. I dug until the sun began to dip below the trees, and then I would stop, my body screaming for rest. I learned the rhythm of the work, the precise angle of the shovel that saved my back, the balance of the wheelbarrow that saved my arms. My soft city hands became calloused and hard. The thin frame I'd had my whole life began to fill out, my shoulders and back broadening with new, unfamiliar muscle. I was being physically remade by the land itself. And as I worked, the world around me came into focus. I started to notice things, the way the light changed throughout the day, filtering through the firs, the different songs of the birds in the morning and the evening. I saw a family of deer grazing in the meadow at dusk. I learned to identify the tracks of raccoons and rabbits near the well. The silence that had once been terrifying was now filled with the language of the forest, and I was slowly, painstakingly learning to understand it. My loneliness didn't disappear, but it changed. It became less of an ache and more of a quiet companionship with the land, the trees, the sky. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was a part of this place, connected to it by the sweat and pain I was pouring into its soil. After a few weeks, a routine visit from a man in a pickup truck startled me. He was a local, an older guy named Carl, who lived a few miles down the road. He'd seen the smoke from my stovepipe and came to investigate. He was wary at first, another outsider on the old Vance property. I was just as wary of him. But I offered him a cup of coffee, and we stood by the growing pile of dirt, making awkward conversation. I told him a half-truth, that I was fixing up my grandfather's place. He just nodded, his eyes taking in the scope of my project. He didn't ask too many questions, but the next day he came back. He didn't say a word. He just dropped the tailgate of his truck and unloaded a rusty but serviceable rototiller. "Easier than a shovel for breaking up that topsoil," he grunted, and then he drove away. It was a small gesture, an act of quiet, rural kindness that felt monumental to me. It was the first time in my life that a stranger had offered me help without any paperwork attached. The first letter from Viridian Development arrived a month into the work. It was delivered by a courier, a man in a crisp uniform who looked deeply uncomfortable on the muddy dirt road. The envelope was thick and glossy, the logo a stylized green leaf that felt like a mockery of the real world around me. The letter inside was polite, professional, and utterly chilling. It restated their generous offer for the land, citing the benefits of economic development for the region. It also casually mentioned the rising property taxes, the cost of maintenance, and the challenges of rural living for an inexperienced individual. It was a threat wrapped in the language of concern. They knew who I was. They were watching. I used their letter to help start the fire that night, watching their logo curl into black ash. Their threat didn't scare me. It fueled me. Every shovelful of dirt after that felt like an act of rebellion. You want this land? I thought. You'll have to go through a mountain to get it. And a mountain it was becoming. Slowly, painstakingly, the piles of earth grew. I followed my grandfather's instructions, bracing the interior walls with heavy timbers I cut from fallen trees on the property. Then I began the real work of covering the hut. I built a rough ramp and hauled the earth up, dumping it over the top, spreading it with a rake. The sound of the rain on the roof changed from a loud, metallic drumming to a soft, muted patter as the first layer of soil went on. The temperature inside the hut began to stabilize, the wild swings from day to night evening out into a constant, cellar-like cool. The structure was becoming a cave, a den. It was becoming a part of the hill. The first snow fell in late November, a light dusting that turned the world silent and white. The work became harder, the ground frozen in the mornings, but I kept digging. I knew I had to get the bulk of the earth moved before the deep winter set in. I was in a race against the season. There were days when the cold and the exhaustion were so complete that I would sit by the stove in the evening, my body aching, and think about the money. I would let myself imagine the warmth of an apartment, the ease of a hot shower, the simple pleasure of not having to fight for every single calorie, every degree of warmth. The temptation was a physical thing, a siren song of comfort and ease. But then I would look at my grandfather's letter, the paper now soft and worn from being read and reread 100 times. I would feel the calluses on my hands, and I would know that I couldn't stop. I was building more than a shelter. I was building a life. I was building myself. The phone calls started in December. They came from a blocked number to the cheap burner phone I'd bought in town. The voice was smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a man who introduced himself as Mr. Klein, a representative from Viridian. He didn't threaten. He cajoled. He talked about my future, about the opportunities I was throwing away. "This isn't about us, Leo," he'd said in one call. "This is about you. We're offering you a golden ticket, a chance to escape. Don't let some misplaced sentimentality about a grandfather you never knew ruin your life before it's even started." His words were insidious, designed to crawl into the cracks of my self-doubt. And they did. Did I really know what I was doing? Was this all just some foolish, romantic gesture? Was I just a kid playing at being a homesteader, destined to fail? It was after one of those calls that I hit my lowest point. A heavy, wet snow had fallen, and the world was a landscape of gray and white. The work had stalled. I was low on food and feeling the profound effects of isolation. The weight of it all, the physical labor, the constant threat from Viridian, the sheer, crushing loneliness, felt like it was finally going to break me. I sat in the hut, which was now more of a cave, the front face the only part not yet buried under a thick blanket of earth and snow. The temptation to give up, to call them back and say yes, was overwhelming. I was tired of fighting. This is the point in the story where everything could have ended, where the scared kid could have finally given in. If you've made it this far, maybe it's because you've had a moment like that too. A moment where giving up felt like the only sane option. If this is hitting you, if you've ever had a truth completely change the way you see your own life, or faced a choice that felt impossible, I want you to know this space is for you. Let me know in the comments, because we're all just trying to understand the stories we were given and find the strength to write the next chapter ourselves. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the fire, letting the despair wash over me. But then, my eyes landed on the canvas bags of seeds my grandfather had left. Potatoes, beans, squash, seeds for a future. Seeds for a spring I hadn't even allowed myself to believe I would see. He hadn't just left me instructions for survival. He had left me instructions for life. He believed I could do more than just hide. He believed I could grow. Something in that simple realization broke the spell. The fight wasn't just about defiance, about saying no to Viridian. It was about creation, about saying yes to the future. I got up, put on my coat, and went back outside. The snow was deep, but I found the shovel. I didn't move earth. I started clearing a path from the door to the well. It was a small, simple task, but it was a start. It was a choice. I was choosing to stay. I was choosing to live. Winter was long and hard, but I survived it. I learned to trap small game. I learned which trees made the best firewood. I learned that the silence of a snow-covered forest is one of the most beautiful sounds in the world. And slowly, as the days began to lengthen, I finished the work. I hauled the last of the earth, covering the roof in a thick, 2-foot layer of soil. The Quonset hut disappeared, subsumed by the hill. All that remained visible was the front wall, with its door and 2 small windows, looking like the entrance to a hobbit hole built into the side of the earth. When spring arrived, it felt like a miracle. The world, which had been a study in monochrome, exploded into a riot of green. And I began the next phase of my grandfather's plan. I took the sod cutter that Carl had quietly left for me one afternoon and began harvesting patches of thick, wild grass from the meadow. I hauled them, piece by heavy piece, up onto the roof of my home and laid them down, creating a living blanket. I planted the seeds from my grandfather's bags in a small garden plot I had cleared near the hut. I watched, with a sense of wonder I hadn't felt since I was a small child, as the first green shoots pushed their way up through the dark soil. I was no longer just surviving. I was building a home. The hut was transformed. It was no longer a cold, echoing metal shell. Inside it was a sanctuary, cool in the heat of the day, warm at night. The sound of the wind was a distant whisper. The rain was a muted drumming on the earth far above me. It felt safe, solid, permanent. I had done it. I had built the home he had designed. One day in late summer, a sleek black car I didn't recognize drove up my road. Mr. Klein from Viridian got out, dressed in an immaculate suit that looked absurdly out of place in the wildness of my land. He looked around, his face a mask of confusion. He was looking for a rusty Quonset hut. He was looking for the weak point, the asset he could leverage. He didn't see it. All he saw was a gentle, grass-covered hill, a small garden, and me, standing by my front door, covered in dirt, holding a shovel. He couldn't see my home because it had become part of the landscape. It was hidden in plain sight. He tried to act casual, to make another offer, but the confidence was gone from his voice. He was looking at someone who couldn't be bought, because I already had everything I needed. I didn't say much. I just stood there, letting the silence and the land speak for me. He finally got back in his car and drove away, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had won. They wouldn't be back. They had lost. It's been 5 years since that day, The sod on my roof is thick and lush, indistinguishable from the rest of the hillside. My garden is larger, and I've learned how to can and preserve for the winter. I have a few chickens now, and Carl helped me set up a small solar panel system, just enough to power a couple of lights and a small radio. I'm not just hidden anymore. I'm home. I never became the man Mr. Henderson expected me to be, the one who took the easy money. I became the man my grandfather hoped I could be. I became a man who knew the value of hard work, the peace of self-reliance, and the profound, unbreakable connection to a piece of land that is not just property, but a part of my own soul. This place, this earth-covered shelter, did more than keep me warm. It did more than keep me safe. It taught me that a home isn't something you are given. It's something you build. It's a choice you make every single day. A choice to stay, to fight, to put down roots, to grow. It's the lesson my grandfather left for me, written not just in his letter, but in the very soil of this land. He didn't leave me an inheritance of money. He left me an inheritance of strength. He taught me that the most valuable things in this life are not the things we own, but the things we create and protect. He gave me back my own story and the tools to build its foundation. Looking out from my doorway now, at the sun setting over the trees, I don't see a lonely patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere. I see a kingdom, a sanctuary. I see the legacy of a man's love and the future I built with my own 2 hands. The scars from my past are still there, but they don't ache anymore. They are a part of the landscape of me, like the cracks in the concrete floor of this hut, reminders of where I came from, but not where I have to stay. This home isn't just dirt and steel. It's a promise I kept to a ghost. It's proof that you can build a future on the ruins of the past, that you can take the most broken, empty pieces of a life and make something whole, something beautiful, something that can keep you alive. If this story meant something to you, if it gave you a little bit of hope for your own journey, then please subscribe and join this community. We are all builders here in our own way. Share your story in the comments. Tell me about the home you are building, whether it's made of wood and nails or courage and hope. I'll be reading every one, because we all deserve a place to call our own.